Hi everyone, I'm Kevin. This is EDL 853. This is Module 8. The case study for this is called Get This Child Out of My Room. It involves Carl, who is an elementary school student. He is having some difficulty in class. There are a couple different teachers involved, and the case study surrounds Carl's behavior. Okay, so what do we know? It's a rural school. I think that kind of um, helps us to understand the problem a little bit because we know that um, resources are a little bit scarce. Superintendents are kind of bouncing around from school to school. They're not in one school every day. Um, I think this kind of impacts the teachers. There was a teacher that was there for a long time when we have a brand new SPED teacher. The student is Carl. Carl is having some behavioral problems. We know that his parents just got divorced. Um, he's having some problems at home, and that is translating into problems in the classroom. He's being disruptive. He's throwing things at the teacher. He's lashing out. He's yelling at other students. We know he's having a hard time. We know that Susan Green is the new SPED teacher. She is replacing a SPED teacher that was in place for around 25 years. It's her first job out of college. I think that's really important to note too. We also have Miss Taylor, who is a gen ed teacher. She's a veteran teacher. She's generally regarded as being a really good teacher. She's the other major player in the case study. We also know that there was an IEP meeting, that there was a behavioral plan put in place. Everybody agreed on it. And then after that, Carl started having some more problems. So there was a new meeting put in place, and there was a new plan put in place where Carl would be pulled out of class by a male teacher, put into a resource room when he's having a particularly hard time or a behavioral outburst. We know at the IEP meeting his parents were arguing with each other, or I suppose the mother was sort of directing some unkind words towards the father in front of the teachers. We also know that Miss Taylor is very frustrated. She doesn't want Carl in her room. She seems unsatisfied with the way that the new SPED teacher is outlining the parameters of the plan. She wants things to go quicker. She wants her to pull Carl out of the room. And then at the end of the IEP meeting, Miss Taylor kind of made a remark, a negative remark to the special education teacher. So that's what we know. There would be some things that I would really like to know if I was a building level leader in order to make a really good decision regarding how to best solve a problem. So the behavioral plan that was put into place, Carl's getting pulled out when he's having a behavioral outburst by a male teacher who might need to restrain him. Carl, I guess, is a pretty big kid. I would need to know more specifics about the behavioral plan. What does it look like when he's pulled out? How is the other teacher alerted? What behaviors does he need to be exhibiting to be pulled out? I would need to know the specifics, and I would especially like to read the behavior plan as outlined in the IEP. I would need to know a lot more in depth specifics surrounding the actual plan itself. I would also want to know what strategies have been tried before. We know that in the case study said something about there's a rewards-based incentive that was working when the old SPED teacher was there, but it's not working anymore. Probably after the divorce or after Carl's parents split up. I would need to know what else has been tried. Surely those aren't the only things that have been tried. Surely a veteran teacher would have a bag of tricks, so to say, about things that interventions she might have put in place to try to help Carl succeed and try to keep him in the room. Certainly she wouldn't just, throw her hands up at the first sign of problems and try to wash her hands of it. I certainly hope not. So what else has been tried that hasn't worked that would help me create a plan going forward? I also had a lot of questions when I was reading this about supports that are available. Is there a social worker available? Is there um, a counselor available for Carl to talk to? Um, is there a dean of students that has been involved trying to do things like what supports are available to Carl? Is there a school psychologist? Psychologists were mentioned, and I know that they bounce around, but can a psychologist get in there and talk to Carl? I would need to know what supports are available to better formulate a plan for him. So what is the problem with all the information that we know? Here's the problem. Carl, an elementary school student, is having severe behavioral problems. Um, there's a new SPED teacher who is kind of unsure of how to solve the problem. It seems like some of her inexperience is, I'm reading between the lines here, some of her inexperience is making her kind of unsure of how to solve the problem for Miss Taylor and for Carl. Another major problem is that the teachers aren't all on the same page. To combat a problem that seems to be of this magnitude, where we're talking about having to take a kid out of an educational environment, we need to have all the adults that are involved on the same page, and they are not. And that's a pretty big problem. It might be even bigger problem than Carl having behavioral outbursts. So what should we do? Well, the first thing I would do is I would call a meeting with all of Carl's teachers, everybody that he sees day to day. If there's a dean, if there's a principal, any adult that is involved in Carl's day to day needs to have a meeting, and there needs to be some kid talk. When Carl goes to another class, if he goes to PE or art or wherever else he goes, are the behaviors the same? Is somebody else doing something that's helping or kind of easing the behavioral outbursts? There needs to be a discussion amongst the adults involved to discuss Carl and see if anything's working, and also if he's exhibiting the same behaviors in all of his classes and in every room that he's in throughout the day. Secondly, there needs to be some data collection. Miss Taylor and all the other teachers that see Carl need to start collecting data. How many times is Carl having a behavioral outburst? When is it occurring? There needs to be some data collection. And then going forward, I think collecting that data could help make a really good case for giving Carl services, whether that's giving him social work minutes, if it's assigning him a paraprofessional, if the behavior doesn't start getting better. So data definitely needs to be collected. That's kind of thinking long term, but that's definitely something that needs to happen. I would also refer the parents to any outside agencies. Sounds like Carl's really troubled, and it sounds like his siblings are really troubled as well. So I would refer Carl's parents to a counselor, an outside counselor, to see after school, or a therapist, or somebody that can talk through some of the emotions that he's having that are surrounding his parents not being around or not being together anymore. I think that's really important for Carl. I would also have a kind of a top-down meeting with all of Carl's teachers and kind of explain explain this plan to them about the data collection and the outside referrals, just so that everybody knows what's going on, so that everybody can be on the same page, because it seems like that's half the problem in the case study. Okay, resolving the issues based on promoting the success of all students. So what is best for all students? What's best for all students is that they're all in an environment that is most conducive to learning, and that's not happening when Carl's having a behavioral outburst. So it's important that we get a handle on the problem so that students can be in the best environment for learning that they can be. It's also important for Carl to be in the least restrictive environment possible. If Carl's getting pulled out, daily or multiple times a day out of a classroom and just being shoved in a resource room, that's not the most conducive for Carl's learning either. So I think it's important that we get a handle of the problems that Carl is in the least restrictive environment. And it's also best for Carl to have tools to overcome some of this anger. So we need to have a plan put in place that's not only reactive, but it's also kind of identifying the problem and trying to fix the problem before it gets worse or before it becomes a problem at all going forward. So if Carl can overcome his anger, and if we equip him with tools to kind of calm himself down, then Carl's going to be in the least restrictive environment. All the kids around him are also going to be able to learn in the best way that they can without having a kid around who's having emotional outbursts. So in reflecting on the case study and when I was making this decision, my first thought is that I really feel for everyone involved. I really feel for Carl. It sounds like a really bad situation with his parents, and he's not able to control his emotions, and that's really sad. That's really sad for a kid to go to. And so I feel for him. I feel for Miss Taylor, being a teacher in a room where a kid is consistently acting out and being a behavior problem, and you're so stressed that you have to go to request an IEP meeting, and you don't even want the kid in your room anymore. I really feel for her too, and I also feel for Miss Green. I know what it's like to be a first-year teacher. It's tough trying to figure out all of, going through all the growing pains of being a new teacher and trying to solve problems. So I really feel for everybody involved. I'm also thinking about the kids in the room with Carl when he's having a behavioral outburst. That cannot be a good learning environment when you have a kid throwing things or slamming things or yelling at kids. That's not a good environment for them. So I'm thinking about them. I'm also trying, when making this decision, I was valuing Carl's education as well. He needs to be educated in the best way possible. The best way possible for him is not to pull him and stick him in a resource room with a textbook. That's not the best way for him to receive his education. As far as the unresolved issues go, I would like to know more about Carl's home life. What's going on? There was things that were alluded to. It seems like he's alone all the time when his mom's at work, and his dad doesn't pick him up very often. I would like to know more about that. I'd also like to know more about support services in the school. I mean, they just weren't mentioned. Support services. I know it's a rural school, and money's probably a little tight, but is there a counselor? Is there a dean? Is there a social worker? Also, has there been any successful cases in this school building with kids who have pretty extreme emotional and behavioral issues? Is there any success stories? I'd like to hear those to try to get ideas on how to solve the problem. Okay, so reflecting on the standard in my own words here, develop and sustain an effective learning culture and effective teaching and learning environment. So how did I, as the educational leader and the building leader, promote the academic success of every student by enhancing instructional capacity, by creating a least restrictive environment for Carl, putting him on the same level as all the other kids by giving him tools to equip him with managing his behavior and his anger. I think that promotes this success for Carl by promoting Carl's equity and bringing him up with all the other students. How did I, as the building leader, promote the personal well-being of every student by enhancing instructional capacity? I've created a safe environment for all of the students in the room by giving Carl tools, hopefully, like I said before in the action plan, by referring him to an outside agency. They can kind of give him a toolkit for managing his